This is a piece of racing history here in Daytona Beach. The last part of famed NASCAR mechanic Smokey Yunick's garage was gutted by fire tonight and is being called suspicious.
There are men who become famous, and then there are men who become myths while they're still walking around, still breathing, still very much alive to hear the jokes told about them. Chuck Norris belonged to that second, rarer category. For decades, he was less a celebrity than a force of nature wrapped in denim and a black belt, a man whose name became shorthand for invincibility itself. So when the world learned in March of 2026 that Chuck Norris had died at the age of 86, it did not feel like ordinary news. It felt like the closing of a chapter that many people assumed, half-jokingly, might never actually end. And in the quiet aftermath of his passing, as tributes poured in from fans, co-stars, and public figures across the world, another story began to surface. The story of exactly what he left behind. Not just memories, not just movies. A fortune, built brick by brick over 6 decades of discipline. And a family now left to carry both the weight of grief and the weight of his legacy. This is the story of how a poor boy from Oklahoma became one of the most enduring action stars in American history, how he built an empire far beyond the movie screen, and how his death has left his loved ones not only heartbroken, but staring at the true scale of what Chuck Norris as a name, a brand, and a man actually built. Long before the roundhouse kicks and the internet memes, there was a boy named Carlos Ray Norris, born on March 10, 1940, in the small town of Ryan, Oklahoma. His mother, Wilma, was of Irish descent, and his father, Ray, was a veteran of the Second World War who worked odd jobs afterward, driving trucks, driving buses, doing whatever kept the family fed. It was not an easy household. Money was scarce, and his father struggled with alcohol, a struggle that eventually led his parents to divorce. For young Carlos, life was unstable, and the family moved frequently as his father searched for work, never quite settling into comfort or security. Growing up, Chuck was not the tough guy the world would later come to know. By his own admission in interviews over the years, he was shy, skinny, and unsure of himself, the kind of kid who blended into the background rather than standing out in a crowd. He was the oldest of 3 brothers, and like many oldest children in struggling households, he learned early to take on responsibility. But nothing about his early years suggested that this quiet, uncertain boy would one day become an international symbol of toughness. After high school, with few options and fewer resources, Norris did what so many young men of his generation did. He joined the military. He enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1958, serving for 4 years, including a station in South Korea. It was there, far from Oklahoma, surrounded by a culture he barely knew, that Norris first encountered martial arts. He began training in Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art, and something in him clicked. The discipline, the structure, the sense of mastery over one's own body. It gave the shy, uncertain young airman something he had never had before: confidence. It is worth pausing here, because this is the part of the story that so often gets skipped over in the retellings of his legend. Before he was a black belt world champion, before he was a movie star, before the internet turned him into a punchline about invincibility, Chuck Norris was simply a young man stationed far from home, doing the same thing thousands of servicemen have done for generations, searching for a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, something solid to hold on to in an unfamiliar place. Martial arts gave him that. It wasn't glamorous in those early days. It was sweat, repetition, bruises, and the slow, grinding accumulation of small improvements that most people never have the patience to sustain. But Norris did. When his service ended and he returned to the United States, Norris did not simply set martial arts aside as a wartime hobby. He pursued it seriously, opening martial arts schools and building a reputation as a fierce and skilled competitor. He worked as a delivery driver and held other odd jobs to keep his growing family afloat while he built his martial arts business on the side, teaching lessons in makeshift studios and slowly cultivating a loyal base of students. Over the following years, he would go on to win multiple national karate championships, eventually being recognized as one of the best fighters in the country, retiring undefeated as a world champion in the middleweight karate division. He earned black belts in several disciplines and became known within the martial arts community long before Hollywood ever knew his name. That martial arts foundation would remain the bedrock of everything Norris did for the rest of his life. Even decades later, after fame, fortune, and a body of film work spanning dozens of titles, he continued to describe himself first and foremost as a martial artist. Acting, he often suggested in interviews over the years, was almost an accident that grew out of that identity, not the other way around. It was through the martial arts world that Norris's path first crossed with a man who would change the direction of his life entirely, Bruce Lee. The two trained together in the 1960s, developing a friendship and mutual respect that would carry into their professional lives. In 1972, Norris appeared alongside Lee in The Way of the Dragon, playing the role of a formidable American fighter who faces off against Lee's character in a now iconic fight scene set in Rome's Colosseum. It was a breakout moment, introducing Norris to a much wider audience and hinting at the screen career that lay ahead of him. Following Lee's death in 1973, Hollywood found itself searching for the next great action star, and Norris, with his lethal skill set and rugged, understated presence, was a natural candidate. Throughout the late 1970s and especially the 1980s, Norris became one of the defining faces of American action cinema. Films like Good Guys, We're Black, Lone Wolf McQuade, Missing in Action, and The Delta Force turned him into a box office draw, the kind of actor whose name on a poster promised explosions, hand-to-hand combat, and a hero who never truly lost. He wasn't necessarily known for delicate acting range. His critics were often quick to point that out, but audiences didn't come to see nuance. They came to see Chuck Norris win, and when he did, film after film. By the mid-1980s, Norris had become one of the most bankable action stars in the world, competing for cultural space alongside names like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. But where those other stars leaned into bombast and spectacle, Norris carried something quieter, a stoic, almost old-fashioned sense of justice that resonated deeply with audiences, particularly in Middle America. He was less flash, more grit, less theatrical, more believable, because everyone knew that behind the character on screen was a man who could genuinely back it up. Unlike many of his action star contemporaries, Norris didn't rely purely on studio machinery to build his film career. He co-founded his own production company, giving him a level of creative and financial control that was unusual for an actor of his era. This decision, made relatively early in his film career, would prove to be one of the most financially significant choices of his life, ensuring that profits from many of his most successful films didn't simply flow through him as a hired actor, but accrued to him as a producer and owner as well. It was a business instinct that set him apart from other action stars of the period, many of whom saw their fortunes rise and fall with the whims of individual studios. Throughout this era, Norris also became known for a very specific brand of on-screen patriotism, frequently playing veterans, law enforcement officers, and men fighting against corruption, terrorism, or injustice. Films like Missing in Action tapped into a very real cultural moment, resonating with audiences still processing the aftermath of the Vietnam War. And Norris's characters, however simplified, offered a form of catharsis for a generation grappling with complicated feelings about American military history. Whatever one thought of the films as cinema, they connected with millions of ticket buyers, and that connection translated directly into a durable, bankable career that lasted decades rather than years. If his film career made Norris a star, it was television that made him a household name for an entire generation. In 1993, Norris began starring in Walker, Texas Ranger, playing Cordell Walker, a modern-day Texas Ranger who fought crime with a combination of old-school law enforcement instincts and world-class martial arts skills. The show ran for 8 seasons, well into 2001, and became a global phenomenon, syndicated and beloved in countries far beyond the United States. Walker, Texas Ranger, cemented Norris not just as an action star, but as a symbol, a kind of American folk hero for the television age. Families gathered around their sets every week to watch Walker deliver justice with his fists and his conscience in equal measure. For an entire generation of viewers, particularly those who grew up in the 1990s, Chuck Norris and Cordell Walker became almost inseparable in the public imagination. Beyond the fight choreography, Walker, Texas Ranger, carried a distinctly moral, almost old-fashioned tone that set it apart from grittier crime dramas of the same decade. Walker was not a conflicted antihero wrestling with ambiguity. He was a clear-eyed defender of right against wrong, a character that reflected much of how Norris carried himself off-screen as well. The show became a comfort food staple for families across the country, airing in a Saturday night slot that made it appointment viewing for millions of households, and its eventual syndication ensured that new viewers kept discovering it for years after its original run had ended, long after most of Norris's 1980s film peers had faded from weekly television screens entirely. It was also during this era, and especially in the years that followed, that something unexpected happened. Chuck Norris became an internet legend. In the early 2000s, a bizarre and wonderful phenomenon known as Chuck Norris facts swept across the internet. Absurd, hyperbolic claims about his toughness, strength, and general invincibility, jokes suggesting he could do the impossible simply by virtue of being Chuck Norris. Rather than resist or resent this strange new form of fame, Norris leaned into it with good humor, embracing the meme culture that had adopted him as its patron saint. It was a rare case of a celebrity becoming more famous and more beloved for a joke about himself than for almost anything he had done on screen. This second wave of fame introduced him to millions of younger fans who had never watched Walker, Texas Ranger, but knew his name as well as anyone. What made this moment so unusual, from a career standpoint, is how rare it is for any public figure to experience a second, entirely unplanned wave of relevance decades into their career, driven not by a new film or television role, but by an organic internet phenomenon completely outside their control. Many celebrities faced with sudden viral fame built on exaggeration or parody have reacted with frustration or attempts at legal pushback. Norris did the opposite. He gave interviews joking along with the memes, published a memoir addressing the phenomenon directly, and even leaned into the joke in later commercial work, signaling that he understood something important. That the memes, however absurd, were rooted in genuine affection and respect for the real toughness and career he had built over decades. That decision to embrace rather than resist the joke likely extended his cultural relevance by an entire generation. What often gets lost in discussions of Chuck Norris's career is just how business-savvy he was behind the scenes. Unlike many action stars of his era who spent lavishly and saw their fortunes shrink over time, Norris built a diversified portfolio of ventures that extended his earning power far beyond his acting paychecks. He became deeply involved in martial arts instruction and licensing, building on the schools and reputation he had established decades earlier. His name became attached to fitness equipment, most famously a line of home exercise machines that were marketed heavily on television throughout the 2000s. These infomercial products, often mocked in pop culture, were in fact enormously profitable, generating tens of millions of dollars in sales and cementing Norris as one of the most successful celebrity-endorsed fitness figures of his time. Beyond fitness products, Norris invested in real estate, including significant land holdings, and he lent his name and image to numerous licensing deals over the years, from clothing lines to branded merchandise capitalizing on the internet fact phenomenon. He also continued to appear in films throughout the 2000s and 2010s, including further installments of the action franchises that had made him famous, ensuring that his income never depended solely on nostalgia. He was also known for his charitable work, particularly through Kickstart Kids, a martial arts-based program he founded to help at-risk youth build discipline, confidence, and character. The program, which placed martial arts instruction into schools, reflected the values Norris had built his entire public identity around: discipline, resilience, and the belief that anyone, no matter how humble their beginnings, could transform themselves through hard work. Norris also built a career as an author, publishing multiple books over the years, ranging from autobiographical reflections on his own life and faith to works of fiction that drew on his martial arts background. These publishing ventures, while smaller in scale than his film or fitness equipment income, added yet another stream of revenue and reinforced his public image as someone who had thought deeply about discipline, perseverance, and personal transformation, rather than simply performing toughness for a paycheck. He also became politically active later in life, publicly supporting causes and candidates aligned with his conservative values, and even authored opinion columns discussing his political and social views. While this activity didn't directly generate significant income compared to his entertainment and business ventures, It further cemented his identity as a public figure whose influence extended well beyond the movie screen, giving him a platform that many former action stars never maintain once their box office years pass. Taken together, this pattern of diversification is what separates Norris's financial story from so many of his Hollywood contemporaries. Where many action stars of the 1980s saw their earning power evaporate once the era of big-budget action films moved on to new faces, Norris continuously found new revenue streams that didn't depend on him remaining a leading man. Fitness products don't require box office draw. Licensing deals don't require a six-pack. Real estate appreciates regardless of whether a person is currently starring in a hit film. This patient, methodical approach to building wealth mirrored the very discipline he had spent his life mastering on the training mat. By the time industry analysts and financial publications began estimating his net worth in later years, the figures were staggering for a man whose public image had always leaned toward humility rather than extravagance. Various financial outlets placed his fortune in the range of many tens of millions of dollars, built not from any single blockbuster paycheck, but from decades of smart, patient business decisions layered on top of one another. For a boy who grew up in a household where money was a constant source of anxiety, it was an extraordinary transformation. For all his on-screen toughness, those closest to Chuck Norris often described a man defined far more by warmth, faith, and devotion to his family than by any of the roles he played. He married twice in his life. His first marriage, to Diane Holchek, began in 1958 and lasted until 1989, and the couple had 2 children together, including his son Mike Norris, who would go on to work in the entertainment industry himself. After their divorce, Norris later married Gina O'Kelly in 1998, and the couple went on to have children together as well, expanding the Norris family further. Norris often spoke about the importance of faith in his life, describing his Christian beliefs as central to how he understood his own journey from a difficult, unstable childhood to a life of purpose and success. He was known to be deeply involved with his children and grandchildren, and despite decades of global fame, friends and family often described him as remarkably down-to-earth, more interested in quiet time with loved ones than in the trappings of celebrity. His son Mike Norris followed him into the entertainment industry, working as an actor and director, and the two collaborated professionally at various points, a rare example of a father-son relationship that extended into shared creative work rather than remaining purely personal. His younger brother, Aaron Norris, also became deeply intertwined with his career, working for years as a director and producer on many of Chuck's film and television projects, including Walker, Texas Ranger itself. In many ways, the Norris family built their careers together, a tight-knit unit whose professional and personal lives were rarely fully separate. Family members frequently described a household where discipline was balanced with warmth, where the same values Norris preached publicly about hard work and perseverance were simply how the family operated privately as well. Norris also endured real personal tragedy earlier in life, including the loss of his younger brother,